Today is the day to harvest our potatoes. I got my hair up, I got my gloves on, and we are ready to go. I've had a terrible potato harvest for the last 2 years, but hopefully today is the day and we're gonna get these guys up, and fingers crossed, we're actually gonna have a decent harvest this year. As we harvest these together today, I'm gonna share with you all the mistakes that I made and exactly what I did differently so that you can learn from my mistakes and not make them. Now, you're probably gonna notice first off that these plants are not completely dead on top. Normally, when we harvest potatoes, we wait for the entire top of the plant to be completely dead. Unfortunately, I started these late. I started them in January. They've been in the ground 4 months and they have not died back all the way, but it got to 90 degrees today and potato roots will not continue to grow. They are basically stalled at this point. So even if I allow them to continue to go, they're not going to get any bigger. And I need this bed and I need this stuff out of here. But before we jump into that, let me just do a quick pause to give you guys a really cool announcement. I recently launched my website, homegrownfloridagarden.com. I took 6 months to build this thing. I probably should have hired somebody, but I decided to do it myself. I know many of you guys were asking for this site. It has everything on it, okay? So it has my Amazon store, it has a link to my consultations if you want to meet with me one-on-one, it has my free ebook planner, it has what to plant at what time of the year, it has my favorite varieties, and on top of that, it has a blog post that is connected to every single one of my videos. Well, probably 90% of my videos. So if I did a video on something and you want to go back and reference it, but maybe you don't want to watch the whole video again, check out the website because it's going to have a blog post with search functionality that will allow you to go and find that exact one. It will also reference the video right next to it. So make sure to head over there, leave me a little comment in one of the blog posts, let me know what you think. Be kind. I built it myself. I've never built a website by myself before, so I hope you like it. So we're going to start out with this first variety here, and this is a golden nugget. I got these seed potatoes from Grand Tetons Organics. I got 3 different kinds. I got the golden nugget, I got Cal White, and then of course I've got the Yukon Gold, which is the traditional variety that I almost always grow. Besides the ones I got as seed potatoes, I also had some potatoes from Publix. Once again, Yukon Golds from Publix that I planted. So I had the least amount of the golden nuggets with just 7 potatoes, and the Cal Whites, I believe I planted 8. And then the Yukon Gold had something like, I think it was like 12 to 14 potatoes that I planted. Let's talk about some of the mistakes I made in previous seasons. It has been right around 2 years since I've had a decent potato harvest. I've been growing potatoes for about 4 years now, and my first couple years I did great. They worked perfectly. Must have been like beginner's luck because now the last 2 years I've had nothing but issues. I have been able to produce potatoes, but very, very small amounts, usually either equal to what I planted or maybe double. So if I planted 1 potato, I might have gotten 2. And that's if I'm lucky, if they even came up. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the issues that I had while we harvest these potatoes. So the first issue that I encountered was I was planting at the wrong time of the year. So I had assumed, a couple years ago that potatoes needed to be planted after the frost date here in Florida, which we don't get a lot of frost, but we do get a little bit. And so I thought, if I plant my potatoes in the dead of winter, I'm going to get a frost that's going to kill the potatoes. And I realized that really the magic moment of when to plant these potatoes is like a month before my last frost date. So my last frost date is March. And so I thought, okay, if I plant them in February, I'm going to be great. That has not turned out to be a good time because by the time the potatoes are large enough and have grown roots, it is now in the 90-degree range and they, don't get very big, or the potatoes don't grow to the size that I want them to, or they just don't grow roots at all because of the heat. Heat is one of those things that is going to keep potatoes from either growing the roots or growing large roots. So that was my first problem that spring. Then I waited. I didn't think that I could plant them in fall, so I waited till the next spring. And then what I did was I actually planted them in a bed where they definitely got way too much shade. I realize now that these potato plants can really handle the weather here in Florida, especially if you grow them at the right time of the year. And that right time of the year for me is during the winter. So if I start them either in October all the way to January, I can usually get a good harvest. But the big trick here is I get a lot of winter shade because of where the sun is in the sky. And so I needed to move them to a bed where they've gotten significant amount more sunlight than I had in the past. And then the last issue that I encountered was I planted them in fall, which fall is a great time to plant them because you have the whole winter where the weather is nice and cool. You only have to protect them from like the times where we have really, really deep frosts, which is very infrequent. We didn't even have any this year at all. But last year what I did, or last fall what I did was I actually chitted my potatoes, which has allowed them to sprout, and then I cut them into pieces thinking that, oh, I could get more potatoes if I cut them into pieces because I see a lot of our friends up north do this. And I thought I'm going to do this and I might be able to, get a larger harvest from this. Well, doing that here in Florida in fall is a mistake. This is probably a little controversial for me to say, but when you cut them and you plant them here in Florida in fall, you could possibly have the same issue that I had, which was that my cut potatoes rotted underground. And I did allow them to scab over. I did do all the right things. I chitted them so that way that they were, already sprouted and they would grow quickly. My problem is immediately after planting them, we had a hurricane that dropped a ton of rain, and I think that it just got the soil too moist. And here in Florida, where it rains a lot, I just don't think that it makes sense to cut the potatoes. You may have better luck cutting your potatoes into pieces if it's spring, because spring, we're in our drought season here and it's not going to get as much rain, and hopefully they will not rot in the ground like mine did in fall. I haven't tested that theory yet because I was just I was so hurt by that fall planting where I lost every single potato. I did not get any that came up, or I had a couple that came up, but very shortly after they came up, the plant died. I assume that they also rotted in the ground after sprouting. Well, let's talk about some of the things I did differently. So this season, what I did was I planted them in spring in January. I probably should have started them in October, but it took me a minute to really wrap my brain around how I was going to improve all the issues I'd been encountering. So starting them in January allowed me to get this harvest. The other thing was I didn't do the trenching like I normally do, although I don't think that was a negative. I actually just dug a hole this time and planted them in the hole with some chicken manure. In the past, I've always planted them with like bone meal, blood meal, kelp meal, which I think is fine too, but I really saw a difference this time with using chicken manure pellets. You could probably also use like alfalfa pellets. You're looking for a nitrogen-rich, slow-acting fertilizer. Another thing that I did was I decided to go with some different varieties. I did get some seed potatoes of the Golden Nugget and the Cow White because I saw that they had a very short days to harvest. It was a 90 days to harvest, and for us here in Florida, we don't have a lot of time. Even at 90 days, my plants were still alive and thriving. We're at 4 months here, so that's 120 days, so it's longer than what was expected. I definitely go for those very short day to harvest varieties in order to get them to produce and be done in between the winter and the summer season. So this is the result of my first quarter bed. These were the Golden Nuggets, which is a new variety, and it looks like I got about 3 times as much as I planted, which I'm happy with. Now we're going to move on over here where I have the first half of this bed right here is going to be the Cow Whites, and then over there, which is very sparse, is going to be the Yukon Golds. Now as we go ahead and pull out these Cow Whites, which did tremendous, let's talk about how I fertilized and watered them. So I did put down that chicken manure pellets when I planted them. After that, they sprouted within about 3 to 4 weeks. And then from there, I waited for the plants to get about a foot tall before I started adding more fertilizer. And the only thing that I really added was Alaska's fish fertilizer, and I did that once every 3 weeks. I probably could have given it to them every 2 weeks, and I probably would have ended up even happier with the result of this harvest, because I think that the potatoes would have gotten bigger, the plants would have gotten larger, and the cow whites would have produced even more if I would have went from every 2 weeks instead of every 3. So I think that was a benefit. Now, in terms of watering, this time I put them in a bed that has very limited irrigation. And the reason I did that is because I really was worried about them rotting in the ground. So I planted them, I watered them in when I planted them, and then I didn't water them again until the plants showed up. And then from there, I just took my cues from the actual plant. So I didn't just water them on a regular basis. I pointed my irrigation micro sprayers out of the bed so that they didn't spray the bed with water whenever it wanted. I waited until I could see that the plants looked like they were stressed. So if they got a little bit of wilty, I would water them. But I have to tell you, through that entire time, it wasn't until I got into around April that I even started to water them on any kind of regular basis. I noticed that my soil holds really well during the cooler months. It needs almost no watering. And then also this year, our winter was very moist. I think it had something to do with the weather patterns for the year, but it rained quite a lot compared to what it usually rains here in Florida during the winter. So by barely watering them and allowing the rain to water them and only watering them when I saw the plant had a little bit of wilting, I think that also helped, because it's very easy to overwater a potato plant and end up with a lot of rot and mush. So that's one big thing that I did differently that I think really helped. I did notice, even with that little tiny bit of watering that I did notice that on the shady side of the bed, which is not the side I'm standing on right now, but the other side of the bed, I did see something that is probably very terrifying for most gardeners, which is I saw some white rot on some of the potatoes. So just that little corner of 1 square foot corner right in front of me on the opposite side of the bed, and when I pulled up those potatoes, some of those potatoes had white rot, and it's basically mold on the potatoes and on the stem of the potato plants. This is really bad because white rot is something that can affect a lot of different plants. It can spread in the soil. It can live in the soil for a ridiculous amount of years, like something like 5 to 10 years. That is a concern to me, and I kind of knew that that might be a problem because I did have carrots in this bed about a year ago, and I noticed white rot on those carrots. So that white rot is still present. And so I'm not going to be able to plant any root plants here. I'm probably not going to be planting any, a lot of different, I'm not going to be able to plant a lot of things in this particular area of the bed because of that white rot. What I am going to do to try to help this situation is I'm going to obviously rotate my crop. No more potatoes, root crops, or anything are going to go in this bed. That's super important. After I harvested this, I did do a soil drench of hydrogen peroxide and water. Basically 1 cup hydrogen peroxide, 2 cups water, and then I drenched the soil. I left it uncovered for a week after this harvest to allow the soil to really, really dry out. And the only thing that I'm going to plant here now in that particular area of the bed are going to be plants that either I don't mind losing or that are not affected by white rot, which is actually very few plants. It's a lot more grass plants and maybe some flowers and stuff. So that little section of that soil is going to be quarantined for a while until I feel like the situation has resolved itself. It's probably going to be a couple years before I do anything in that particular area. I could dig the soil out, but I think I'd have to dig the soil out for the entire bed because it is a mold and it's got spores and it's going to spread over the entire bed. If you have some tricks or tips or anything about how to deal with white rot, definitely head down to the comments and leave me a note, because I'm kind of at a loss at what to do other than not plant in that bed, which is awful because I have limited space. I am planning on doing a fall planting of potatoes this year. Since I was able to figure out how to do it for a spring crop, I want to figure out how to do it for a fall crop. So the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to plant them in September or October. I'm going to start with whole potatoes, definitely whole potatoes, so that they don't rot in the ground. I'm going to move them to a new bed that has never had potatoes before. I'm going to do furrows. These I planted super deep, and I think that that kept them really cool, and that was helpful, but man, they were a pain in the butt to get them out of the ground and out of the soil because the potatoes were so deep. And I don't hill my potatoes personally. With 90-day potatoes like I grow here, there's really no point. It's not like we have this super long season where we can, hill them up and they'll continue to grow upwards. That's just not my reality here in Florida. So for fall, I'm going to plant the whole potato. I'm going to do a furrow. I'm going to give them as much space as I did this season, which I gave them at least 1 to 1.5 square feet, and that seemed to work. I'm going to use the same chicken manure and fish fertilizer, but I'm going to up the fish fertilizer and do it a little bit sooner. I'm growing only the cow white and the golden nugget and possibly a new variety that I haven't quite found yet. But I'm saying goodbye to Yukon Golds. I think the cow whites taste just like the Yukon Golds, and the golden nugget is like a great baking potato. So for me, as much as I love Yukon Gold, I am not going to fight with them anymore. So I am moving away from that variety. I am sticking to my cow white and my golden nugget. And I'm also hopeful that I will be able to store these in a way that I can use them as my own seed potatoes. The other thing that I'm going to do is reduce the watering. Just like I did this season, I am going to water them as minimally as possible. I feel like in some climates, like up north, you do have to water them on a regular basis. But down here, we get so much rain. I mean, in fall, we get a ridiculous amount of rain that I would possibly drown them. So I am going to put them in a bed where I point the irrigation away from the bed so that it doesn't irrigate and I have to hand water them, and that will help me control that a little bit better. I'm also going to do a better job of breaking up this soil because the soil was pretty compacted when I was pulling them out right here. And that just made it more difficult. The potatoes seem to have grown just fine in it. I guess it wasn't compacted enough to hurt them, but it was painful for me to have to get them out. I'm also going to reduce the amount of mulch that I use. I usually am a big mulch user. Given the whole water situation in my garden and how well my soil holds on to water, I don't want these potatoes during our fall season to get super wet. So I'm going to work with the climate and realize that our fall is wet. I'm not going to water them. I'm going to let the rain water them, and I'm going to see how well they do with just that, and then just monitor them every day when I go out in the garden to see if they need additional watering. But I'm going to pull that mulch away. I know this is crazy, right? Because so many people hill theirs, so it's like heavy mulch. But this watering thing is coming to me that it is a big determinant here in Florida of how to grow potatoes, if they're going to rot or if they're going to grow well. Having too waterlogged soil here is really detrimental to those potatoes. So if I remove the mulch, it gives that soil a chance to breathe and air out and kind of dry up. And then finally, for my fall potatoes, the other thing that I'm going to do is because it's in fall, because I'm going to start them in September, October, I will be able to allow them to grow completely all the way through winter. If we get a good frost and it kills the top of the potatoes, that will be just fine for me, because then I will leave them in the ground for 1 to 2 weeks to allow those skins to toughen up before I harvest them. When I harvest my potatoes in spring, I notice the skins are very, very soft, and they were just kind of coming off just from rubbing my finger over them. So they are not tough. They are that new potatoes variety. and they are going to have a little bit problem in storage. I am curing them right now, and I'm hoping to find a way to cure them to where they can cure for a decent amount of time. But I think that if I allow the tops to die out during our first frost and I leave them in the ground for a couple of weeks, that will help toughen up those skins and will also help with storage for those fall potatoes. So I just got them all pulled up. This is the golden nugget. This is the Cal White. And then if you can see that tiny little pile right there, that's the Yukon Gold. And the funny thing is the Yukon Gold was the one that I actually planted the most potatoes, and it only had about 30% that came up, which I don't understand. The first ones that came up were the golden nugget, which I think makes sense because those are the bigger potatoes. Look how big they are. And the biggest of the Cal White is this size. You can see the difference. Now, I definitely got more of the Cal Whites. They were highly productive. The golden nuggets, I got less, but I got much larger potatoes. These are like baking size potatoes, which I am just so stoked about. But I'm going to take a pitchfork and I'm going to dig around just to make sure I didn't miss any, because I found that there were a lot that were like really deep down. And it's probably because I planted my seed potatoes really, really far down. So I'm going to get the pitchfork out and I'm going to check and make sure I didn't miss any. Don't forget to head over to the website, check it out, let me know what you think. I hope you guys had fun learning about all the mistakes I've made, and finally having a successful harvest. I am beyond thrilled. Stay tuned though. Make sure to hit that follow and that notification button, because if you are a southern gardener without access to a root cellar or a cold room or something like that, I'm going to be testing out 3 different ways of how to store these potatoes to see if I can get them to last. Happy gardening, guys.